Intelligence Center will be our host, and she'll be collecting those. So at the end, we'll do our best to address some of them today with our panelists. The next slide, please. So our session today is being brought to you by the Cultural Intelligence Center, which provides research-based tools over thousands of different trainings, 250,000 assessments in 168 countries to build cultural intelligence and understand cultural intelligence. And cultural intelligence can be defined as this ability to work and relate effectively with people who are different from you. And next slide, please. My name is Amy Swenson. I'll be your moderator for the panel today. I'm a client consultant with the Cultural Intelligence Center. So I do work with our corporate organizations to help with building out strategy for individual, team, and organizational development. And prior to working closely with the Cultural Intelligence Center, I have been working with leadership, individual, and team development for Fortune 500 and Global 2000 organizations for a few years now, and have been very blessed and fortunate to be a mentor of Dr. Fred Keel, who's one of the first CEO coaches and has been known in Fortune Magazine and HBR and Strategy of Business and a lot of other places for his research with Wharton and published with Harvard Business Press in executive behavior and development. So happy to be your host, and I'm thrilled to be here and moderating this panel of esteemed experts as we dive into dialogue about cutting-edge strategies for developing cultural intelligence, or this capacity to work and relate and lead inclusively with others that may be different. Next slide, please. And I'd like all the panelists, if you will, to take just 60 to 90 seconds to do a bit of an introduction, please.
Thanks, Amy. I'll start. My name is Robin Shabazz, and I am thrilled to be here with you today. I am what I would refer to as a DEI strategist. I am a recovering employment attorney with a background in HR as well. So after, 3 decades of corporate America, I ventured out and started the East Ledge Group, and we really focus on building culturally intelligent teams. Met and fell in love with Dr. David Livermore and the Cultural Intelligence Framework about 4 years ago, and have been actively engaged in using it with my clients ever since then.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lynette Collins, and I'm the proud mother of 2 Black biracial children who are attending Western Michigan University. Go Broncos. What drives me is creating an equitable world where everyone has the ability to advance and thrive. And therefore, I'm an unapologetic champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe in people and their potential. And I see my job as creating work environments where people can feel free to bring their authentic self to work, to know that they're valued for who they are, and that they're supported in their ability to develop, advance, and thrive. I'm also the first vice president of diversity and inclusion at PennyMac. I'm on the board of directors for Inforum, and I'm a graduate of the CQ Leadership Academy. Thank you for having me here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Al-Haddad. Please call me Joe. So I'm a certified CQ facilitator for the past 5 years. It's been a great journey working with Cultural Intelligence Center and Dr. David Livermore. I'm also a certified PCC ICF coach, and additionally an emotional intelligence coach and assessor. So like my own goal in life is to reignite humanity on this planet, and part of it, to start those conversations that will trigger humanity, is to get people to understand that we are beautiful with our differences. So that's part of my journey, and I use CQ to encourage people and support them to start those conversations to lead to a ground where we can actually have fruitful conversations. Thank you for having me today.
Great. And so for me, Thais Chanman, just tell you a little bit about me personally. I am the daughter of Trinidadian parents, a Black mom, Chinese dad, first generation American. And I'll share that I was born in Brooklyn, raised in LA, now living in Dallas. Go figure. I'm the proud mom of a graduating senior from college. So super excited about that. And then professionally, I'm a culture architect and change catalyst. I spent the last 20 years in marketing, communications, and HR, transforming organizations at the system and individual level. And I've worked for a number of different industries, including heading DEI at Amazon for their corporate functions. And I recently took on a new role at Remitly, where I'll be designing the people and HR function and intentionally weaving diversity, equity, and inclusion as a golden thread through everything we do. So I will share a little bit about me personally, just to illustrate that there's a strong intersection between personal and professional that really influence how we develop and change. So I am super excited to be here with my fellow panelists. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. You've got a lot of connections coming through chat with Trinidadian and Brooklyn. I don't know if you're seeing that flash
Yes,
on the bottom of the
yeah.
screen as you're
Shout
chatting,
out.
but yeah, good. All right, well, let's get started. Next slide, please, May. So our conversation today, how does one develop? How does one change behavior and develop the culturally intelligent employee? Next slide, please. And to help us with this conversation, we're going to really step into this particular framework for an individual development process, starting with discovering why someone should care or their own motivation to take in information to become culturally intelligent. How do we curate drive for an individual? Then we're going to walk out a bit into what are some of the tools, the cutting edge tools that you love, that you've seen, that you're using, and talk a bit about that. We're going to walk then into action planning and first step support and some strategies around KPIs, which KPIs, how to develop robust action plans at the individual level, and thoughts there. And we're going to leave time at the end, as mentioned in our description for today's session, for all of our panelists to share one thing. If they can leave you today and for the rest of your day with one thing to really keep in mind to make sure that your training and development program is not a check mark sort of training and development program, but something that's going to lead to sustained change, what's that? So we're going to give everyone a bit of time to share their one thing with everyone today. And then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for question and answer. So throw them out there if you have questions that we don't talk about throughout the rest of the time and that you're really wanting the panelists to respond to. Okay, so next slide, please, May. And Thais, why don't you help us get started? Please share your thoughts in terms of what are some strategies that you really enjoy or really think are quite smart in terms of curating this individual drive or motivation for people to want to discover themselves as a diverse or cross-cultural leader.
Yeah. So, when I think about change and transformation and just evolving as a person, I really believe that it's important to embrace a learning or growth mindset, right? It's so important. Just be open to learning. And then when I think about internal motivation, so the U piece, it's really a process like many things. And so we only have so much energy as human beings to really expend. So we ultimately need to decide how important our particular need to change is to us. And a critical piece of that for me is just the evaluation piece. And as we know, we're constantly being evaluated by others and we're evaluating ourselves, constantly looking inward. And so for me, the question is always, as you're going through this evaluation process, do we recognize our own biases? Do we truly listen to what other people say about us? And do we even respect or value what they say? So that to me, it's starting with that whole internal evaluation process, because that becomes the internal measurement of our desire to change. Because, I have to determine how big is my why? Why is it important? Why is my need important? So when I think about, depending on what outcomes you want, you'll ultimately need to determine, is this important enough and meaningful enough for me to motivate me to change? So really start with your why. And then on the extrinsic side, so the external side, and I think about this more from a practitioner perspective, it's, I think about environment. And a lot of motivation is situational. So if you were to ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers about what's motivating to them. So from a practitioner perspective, I always think about, how do we create conditions for safety and trust? so that we can really identify what's actually broken or hindering people's ability to act. And then just really thinking about how can we intentionally create that space for people to be seen, heard, valued, respected, ultimately an inclusive environment so that they are motivated to change. And it just becomes really extremely powerful when you have that internal desire to change with the environmental conditions for change and transformation, so that you can grow as an individual and evolve.
I really like the evaluative piece that you mentioned too, with we're always evaluating ourselves. So how do we tap into that, in these programs that we're putting together to help people really see how they show up in their self at work and the impact they have, and is it the impact that they want to have, and how do we build that into this development journey that we create? Robin, do you have more to add here, or how would you answer this question?
Thank you, Amy. Well, for me, the bulk of my clients that I work with really come from more of an extrinsic motivation. If you think about where we are today, in light of everyone witnessing the murder of George Floyd and this collective awakening, if you will, there's been, this firestorm of organizations searching for that DEI magic wand. And so really tapping into that pressure. And it's okay to tap into that. And sometimes that pressure comes from internal, peer pressure. Other times it may come externally from stakeholders or funders. Or in the corporate setting from wanting to be on the leaderboard with your peers and wanting to brand yourself as the most inclusive organization in your industry. Specifically, I'd like to just talk about a group of the industry that I work with the most, and that's the healthcare industry. And in the healthcare industry, most of my clients are white women who just really haven't had that opportunity to really look inside themselves at how they operate, often on automatic, and how they're reliant on those automatic associations, those unconscious biases. And so right now, the healthcare field is under immense pressure because of the rising statistics, that disparity in health outcomes for Black and Brown individuals. Specifically, if you think of the maternal mortality disparity rates, in the US, it's 3 to 4 times higher for Black women than white women. And it's the only developed nation where that number is increasing versus decreasing. And all the research says that, let's remove all of the other variables, socioeconomic status, access to insurance, and it really comes down to our implicit biases. So being pressured, if you will, by society, by funders, by agencies, to really take concrete steps to reduce this huge disparity in healthcare, specifically in maternal mortality outcomes, is something that I see a lot of healthcare agencies tapping into. And there's no doubt that when you CQ your bias, you're going to see outcomes. If you take the CQ action plan seriously, you're going to be able to affect change at the individual level and ultimately at the system level. So that's really what I have been able to tap into.
That's a nice call out in what's going on in the healthcare industry, for sure. I mean, there's definitely agencies and governing agencies that are requiring them to step further into taking inclusiveness seriously because of a lot of the outcomes you just mentioned. So nice call out. Lynette, would you like to add in?
Yes, I'll answer the question in the context of helping someone develop CQ drive that is in a position of privilege. I think Robin makes a really good point about that. So generally the experience for these individuals is pretty positive. And so they might not feel a need to change. And CQ drive is all about identifying the with them, what's in it for me, for each individual. And this is where people start to ask themselves, do I care? Or better yet, why should I care? Do I have the motivation? Is there any reward for me behaving differently? And do I have the confidence and belief in myself that I can? So even if someone cares and they're motivated, if they lack confidence in themselves and their ability to learn to be more culturally intelligent, it will impact their overall motivation and effectiveness. And so confidence is often impacted by fear, and fear can come from people being worried about making a mistake or looking foolish. And that's very real in this space of cultural intelligence and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when I think about my experience in helping to develop CQ drive or motivation, it boils down to a few things, especially for people that are in a place of privilege. You need to connect their heads, their hearts, and build their confidence that they can develop the capability. So confidence builds by creating safe spaces for people to be curious, to learn and grow in an environment free from shaming. And over the last 18 months, I have seen a lot of shaming happening because people feel others should know better by now. But I would say in my experience, shaming only serves to shut people down, and it causes them to recoil and disengage. And the other thing, like if we think about it from the flip side, research is now surfacing that shows organizations that are strong in diversity and inclusion are also strong in creating a culture of learning. So if you want to help develop CQ drive, create safe spaces for learning. So I mentioned connecting people's heads and their hearts and confidence. So you connect people's heads through data. We have access to all kinds of information. There's external research. If you're part of an organization, there's internal talent data, and you can look at your employee engagement data as well. Show the organization, are people having similar experiences at work? Are the populations in the organization that are having a less favorable experience compared to others, and where is it breaking down? I think you could connect to people's hearts by making it personal. So for people in a place of privilege, you have to help them think through, how does this impact someone they care about? And that person can be outside the organization or inside. It could be a spouse, a child, could be a work colleague, a friend. Once it becomes personal, then the CQ motivation increases and people start to ask, do I think this work environment is fair for people like the person I care about? Are the decisions made inside the organization just and equitable for people I care about? Or do I just want more for this person that I care about? And once people start to open up to the fact that experience for individuals like the person they care about may not be fair, they then want to be part of the change. They're motivated to drive change. And it doesn't stop there. They start to then see how things may not be fair for other people beyond those initial people they care about, and they want change for them too. And so the way to connect all of that together, and Thais mentioned this too, is exposure. You can connect it through exposure. As humans, we have the tendency to think people are experiencing the world in the same way we are, when in fact, many people aren't. In the workplace, we could be going through the exact same situation, but having very different experiences based on how we identify. And so there's power in sharing personal experiences and creating safe spaces and opportunities for exposure where people engage in dialogue and they learn how their experiences differ depending on how they identify. And particularly when a person's experience seems unfair or very painful, it inspires motivation. And people want to do better. They see value in being part of making a positive difference, and they feel confident that they can be part of the solution that not only benefits themselves, their colleagues, but also the organization.
Nice. Lots of good, helpful insights. I want to ask you a question about something that you said, and this can go to you or anyone else in the panel that wants to respond to this. You mentioned that this importance of connecting your head and your heart when you're walking out this process. And that's a term that you hear a lot especially when you talk about executive development or senior leadership development, being an inspirational leader. How do we connect your head and heart together so that you are able to move beyond being a team leader to be inspirational? Just from a practical standpoint, because these programs and putting your head on in terms of program design or structure, there's always time and there's competing priorities and there's budget that always bump up against putting these sorts of programs together. When you look at the key critical populations across an org and you're trying to develop culturally intelligent employees, are there populations within the org that you think it's more important or just critical that you somehow bake in time for them to connect their head and heart together in order to effectively create a culture that has culturally intelligent employees? Or is it everyone? Are there certain key critical populations in this program design that we have to do it here? I mean, how do you build that in? And again, anyone can respond to the question.
So if I could respond first,
Yeah,
I
please.
believe ultimately everyone needs to be engaged, but I do think my preference is to start with leaders, because leaders really set the tone and they have to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And a lot of these discussions where you're connecting head and heart are really uncomfortable. And they're often topics where people feel like, are we allowed to talk about that here at work? Is that taboo? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about this, but if you really want to create an inclusive culture where people have a sense of belonging and connect to the organization, you have to be willing to talk about the things that make you uncomfortable. So I think starting with that leadership team and giving them the tools and ability to connect head and heart, I think that's where I would start. But I do think it's important to engage all employees, because we're all responsible for being, whether you call them workplace allies or culturally intelligent employees, whatever it happens to be, you need everybody playing their part in creating inclusive work environments in the organization.
Yeah, just a quick add. So totally agree with you, Lynette. Just to speak about the leadership piece, because as employees always look up to leaders. They expect the leaders to set the tone. And so if a leader isn't vulnerable, isn't open, right, it makes it really, really hard to feel safe for you to do the same, because employees are going to take cues from leaders on, is this an inclusive culture? Is this acceptable? So I think that's a really, really valid point. So agree with Lynette 1000%.
Good. All right, well, let's keep going. May, do you want to switch the slides here? Okay, so we've talked a bit about, spent a bit of time on motivation. Now we're getting into tools. So let's talk about tools. What sort of practical frameworks, tools have you seen? Do you love? Let's dive into this. And Joe, do you want to start with this response and talk a bit about tools and frameworks?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I'm going to actually build on what the other panelists were also sharing, given that we need to agree that all intelligences start with yourself for a reason, because you need to have that self-awareness. And talking about the head and heart, part of the understanding that we also need is that the head is not against the heart. They both need to work line in line. There's a balance that we need to strike. And this is what the tools basically support us to do. So in addition to what I'm going to go in terms of the cultural intelligence tools, we also support people by understanding their emotions better by using emotional intelligence tools to sort of support the people to understand what does it mean to create a safe space from an emotional perspective, so that we can basically come out and say, all right, so it's not them against me. We are both probably working towards the same goal, but we're probably doing it in a different way. And one of the amazing tools that I actually would love to touch base on is the CQC Pro tool, which basically supports us in understanding the different cultural values where people come from. And some of the organizations that I worked at, we basically had in one building of 5 or 6 floors, almost 90 plus nationalities. And try and get all of those to understand that everyone is a professional in their own way. Everyone comes from a place where they honestly believe and they know that they're doing things the right way. And then suddenly shifting that to a new place where they're being told what to do and how to do things. The first question that comes to mind is, so why did you hire me if you want to do this your way. So the point is about, it's sort of you're bringing a number of tribes and putting them in one place and telling them, let's build the nation, right? So you actually need all of those people to have a conversation to understand that the goal is to build a nation. It's not to take over from each other. And I think what this does, the moment you start to provide people with data and numbers, you're able to give them a starting point for them to see the truth of the matter, that it's not about you, it's about where people come from, what they believe and what they've been doing for a while. And then understanding what do we need to do in order to create that shift. And at a later stage, we're also going to be speaking about the power of creating an action learning step within the process. But again, coming back to the tool, it is about providing people with the data, because again, going back to executive leadership today and how you're going to convince them that they need to invest, of course, with the amount of budget cuts, especially today, looking at the work that is shifting to remote versus office spaces. People need to still understand that it's even harder when you're remotely working with people, because now you're using almost 50 or even less % of your communication strength. And you need to understand how you're going to communicate with people and what's the best way to communicate with them. And the best way to do it is to learn about yourself in terms of your emotional intelligence, and then learn about others to agree where you're going to get to during your process of growth and business. So yeah, so that's it from my side. Yeah.
Very good. Wow, 90 plus different nationalities. That's a lot. That's quite the diverse situation. And you mentioned CQC. And you mentioned CQC, which is Cultural Intelligence Center, and then the Cultural Values Profile, I think, is the tool you're referencing, right? And the one that you found helpful in kind of navigating these globally diverse teams to help them establish trust and confidence with each other in a way that's affirming and different. Nice.
Absolutely. So what those tools help us do is they help us coach people to understand the reports. So it wasn't just, there you go, there are your reports. We coached people through the process. So it is a combination, and the tool also helps us to coach people through. So yeah.
Nice. Spoken like a true coach. Very good. Lynette, would you like to add on?
Yes. Let me see here. When I think about the most valuable tools, I'm with Joe on the culture values. There's a cultural values mapping exercise. And I think I have a slide that helps illustrate this. So it doesn't matter. What I found is it doesn't matter if you have a team that works across geographies or a team that's in the same country. This exercise helps people to understand how to work more effectively as a team, as well as how to improve interactions on an individual one-on-one basis. So it starts with, as you see on the slide, the group mapping all of their cultural values on this chart. And then from there, participants can see where members of their team are similar or different to the cultural value norm with which they perceive that team member identifies. And often it's not what people expect or anticipate. And so there's a lot of aha moments happening at this point in the exercise. But then they take it a step further and they start to identify, where are they most similar? So where do they see themselves clustered together? And where do they see the most difference? Where are they, spread apart the most on these on this value continuum? And again, this prompts the most engaging dialogue, because they talk about what are the pros and cons of each. So most of the time, people will think the assumption that they come in with is, if we're similar, that must be positive if we all share the same value. But then through the course of discussion, they start to realize, well, maybe it's not good if we're all the same. And then similarly, there's a perception that it must be bad if we're so different on this continuum. And again, through the course of conversation, people start to see, well, maybe it's good that we have this approach and there's benefit to that. So I've heard teams in this exercise say, oh, that makes sense why we rush to make decisions and then we have to revisit them, right? So they start to see where their effectiveness breaks down. Or I've had people say to each other, like one-on-one, oh, I can see this is why we get on each other's nerves sometimes, right? So I think this is a really great tool. We see groups take this back to their departments so they can leverage it and continue to use it going forward. And it's just a very effective way to discover how to improve team effectiveness, as well as how to more effectively engage individuals on your team.
Nice, good. Yeah, I would agree, just from the working with clients around cultural intelligence, the cultural values profile seems to be a very, very popular tool and approach to bridging gaps in a very affirmative way. And I totally appreciate that this is sponsored and presented by the Cultural Intelligence Center. So we're talking about their tools, which is appreciated and amazing. And is there anything else, outside of what we offer here that you'd also call out to people that may be joining as helpful tools for continuing the conversation? And
Amy, I'll jump in here. So again, when you're at this starting point of your CQ journey, it really begins with motivation, right? Whether it's your internal or external motivation. And then as it ends, as you indicate in the diagram, it really ends in those safe first steps. So what I have found to be very effective in marrying the beginning and the end is utilizing the tools that are embodied in the concept of authentic courage. And those elements are being aware when you experience discomfort, acknowledging that discomfort in your own vulnerability, and taking that first step, even if it feels risky, because you can reimagine any mistakes just as growth opportunities. So I find that that's very effective, helping the client move from I'm motivated to how do I take those first steps. So we really then kind of build out each one of those 4 elements of authentic courage. And through that conversation and through really kind of stepping through that, we help the clients understand that being motivated to take a first step does involve some concrete skills. And so we're also able to practice some of those through some simulated discussions where they break out into groups and teams. And you can do this at your workplace, or you can do this with teams that folks who really don't even know each other, but just the key is practicing the skills. So you begin to practice these conversations that typically are not workplace normal conversations, but that they tackle some of these tough issues in the workplace, and you step through each one of those elements.
nice, good, great. Well, let's keep rolling here. If you may, do you want to go to the next slide here? And we'll keep going for action
Amy,
planning.
there are a bit of questions. There's a bit of a confusion about the icons. So maybe we could just explain that a bit to the people.
Sure, we can go back to the previous slide. Can you reverse back, May?
Just one more, May.
There we go.
Yes, thank you. So
Yeah.
basically the icons which are on the lines represent different people, and where, according to the assessment, where they would basically score in terms of whether they're on the collectivism side. Let's say, for example, the first example, the collectivism side and the individualism side. Based on the assessment, different people are placed differently. Like Lynette was explaining a while ago, this is just a representation of how people would, for example, if you're running a group session of 4 people, how each one would be represented if they all put it on the same chart. So just for them to visually see that they are actually different, but there is nothing wrong where you stand, but the wrong is not being able to know where you stand versus where others are, and understanding that everyone is different from each other. So yeah, I thought we could respond quickly to the questions. Thank you. Thanks,
Really helpful.
May.
Thanks. And I'll just add for those in chat that are asking about how to find out more information, I would just encourage you to reach out to the Cultural Intelligence Center. We'll share some information at the end, or you can go to the website and there should be a chat function right away if you wanted to ask questions, but we're happy to help you with understanding this tool a bit further as well. Okay, next slide. Let's keep going into our next piece of the development cycle. Good. Right, so robust action planning and safe first step support. We're going to maybe try and combine these two a little bit in our panelist response, just to make sure we have sufficient time to get to some of the good questions people submitted for us to respond to as a panel today. But let's talk a little bit about action planning. So one of the challenges that comes up is, how do I ensure that I'm really supporting my employees or people going through these sorts of training and development exercises, that they've got a robust action plan, one that's going to really lead to sustained change. And, Thais, do you want to kind of take this question a bit further in terms of, some comments or some dialogue around action planning?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I think about sustaining change, that's really important for any kind of transformation or change. And I think, and I'm just going to take a quick sidebar here in terms of when I think at the individual level and change, people tend to have sustained change if they experience something. And, we talked a little bit about experiences, because experiences really help people to connect to whatever it is that will prompt that motivation for change, because then it starts to shift your behaviors, which will then produce an action, and then you get those results. So when I think about, and I'll call these some tips for individual change and sustaining that. So actions and behaviors. A lot of times in organizations, we have these action plans, but how do you make it personal and really take it down to that individual level so you can have that organizational change? And really simply integrate whatever that change is or that behavior modification into everything that you do. So all of your plans and priorities, because by weaving that into your day-to-day activities, you really ensure consistency and making it real. The second thing is ensure you have appropriate monitoring and feedback systems in place. So pick a few people that you trust that will provide you honest and constructive feedback. Let them know what you're working on, and then just check in with them periodically to ensure that they're witnessing or experiencing whatever that change is. The third thing would be just, anticipate and know that change is hard. And so you are going to derail. Life happens. Some days are really great. Some days are not so great. You're not always going to accomplish everything you set out to, but really take that moment. And this is kind of that assessment evaluation. Take that moment to understand what caused you to derail. Learn from the experience and then reapply yourself towards those behaviors that you want to continue, but know that it's a journey and it's going to take time. You didn't get here overnight, so the change won't happen overnight. And then just your attitude, really having a positive attitude versus focusing, versus a negative attitude or feelings of guilt because you derailed. Really focus on the progress you're making. So that reframing is really important as you go through and really at the individual level, trying to sustain some new behaviors. And then finally, and most importantly, and I think we don't do this enough, is celebrate those successes. As humans, we're naturally motivated to do things that make us feel good. So make sure that you're acknowledging when you've had some progress, even if it's small, just really sit and appreciate the fact that you've taken that step forward. And I'm really focusing on that individual piece, because when I think about how you get collective change or transformation in an organization, it is at that individual level. So helping people to know, I have my action plan, I do these things, will help everyone as a collective to shift to the new
I love
wave.
the focus on celebrating successes. That's key, and just so key for culture and positivity, and just to keep us all motivated, our brains motivated to continue. I want to ask one question, because you had mentioned, making sure this is ingrained in everything that we do. So sometimes I've seen action plans where they'll say, Okay, this quarter, I'm going to take my team out to lunch, or I'm going to attend a diversity event. Yay or nay, sort of an action plan. What do you think about these that come back and they're like, we have a quarterly check mark and my team's going to hold me accountable. I'm going to do it once a quarter. Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just, okay, we'll take that. But when I say weaving it into everything you do, it is just not a quarterly thing. It's at the daily level, and it has to be, it's, what I say, what I do, how I measure, like everything. So if your measurement is to have these, I mean, hey, I'm all for like going and hanging out on a quarterly basis, but what are you doing every day to recognize and create the environment where people feel like they're included and they belong and they're getting recognized every day versus, that can culminate at in the quarter, but what is it? And so being really, really intentional about, and I will say weaving it into everything that you do. And I also think, this is separate topic, but just, from a business perspective, how are we weaving this into how we, and I'm seeing a lot in the chat about accountability. So, how are you weaving it into the business as well as the people side of things? And how are you holding people accountable? Because I believe accountability is a big word, but you have to talk about consequence as well. So.
And that question can be for anyone else in the panel too. If you want to agree with Thais, or you want to say, no, I think quarterly, events might work in these situations. Does anyone else want to add on to that question, or have?
I'll add on to that. What I've seen as one of the most successful ways in which organizations really build CQ into the fabric of their company is when they are able to connect it with their values. Because if you think about your company values, it represents how everything gets done. And I have one company that comes to mind. One of their values is yes and we were able to take the entire organization through CQ training. So that in itself was a gift, and from CEO all the way down. And they're very values driven. And so through the training, we're able to bring that yes and alive through the application of one of the CQ capabilities, CQ knowledge, which is all about how do you leverage those similarities and those differences. So how does your core value of yes and connect to that? And so that's just one example. They had several others. Plant the flag was another core value. They're a media company, so they have these really creative core values. And we were able to connect it to the third capability, CQ strategy, which is really about planning effectively for those multicultural interactions. So they're able to plant the flag. So the one successful way to ensure that CQ is embedded is to strategically connect it to their values, so that as they're speaking their values, you're connecting them to the behaviors embedded in the CQ capabilities.
Nice, good. Joe, what else would you add here?
I think it's the biggest challenge when it comes to action planning is, was this a checkbox activity, or was there an actual intent to plan what happens after this? So I think a major thing that needs to happen in order to support the action planning is the analysis bit. So getting to understand the importance of why we're going to spend this time doing this, learning more about ourselves and about others. And then we get together, because I like, for example, we used to break it to two parts. A part was what action planning you're going to do with yourself. And the second is, what are you going to do with your leader and your peers and overall or holistically? And we used to always have the leaders be included in those sessions, because the more vulnerable and the more their shields are dropped, the easier it is for them to also support their team members and themselves in creating a very robust and accountable action plan. And I totally agree with what Thais said a while ago about it not being a quarterly thing. I think, and I honestly believe that CQ is not just something that you do for 8 hours or 9 hours a day, and then you're like, poof, it's done. Now I can do whatever. No, it lives with you. And the more aware and the more you live with it, and the more you make it part of who you are, I think it will help you honestly grow as an individual rather than just being someone who is somebody else wearing a mask for 8 or 9 hours, because that will tire you as an individual more than the people around you. But living that and actually understanding why you're doing this and then moving on to doing it and being very open. And part of the action planning is come back and let me know if it's not working so that we can support you on how to make it work. Right? So it's not just I'm going to do a diet for, like 2 months, lose weight, and then go back and eat whatever I used to eat. No, it's an actual shift in life. It is not easy. There is going to be pain moments where you just want to crack into who you originally were, because that's who you were for a long time. But once you agree that it's a transition that you have to make in terms of your lifestyle, I think it will support you when you come to put in realistic action plans.
Let's talk a little bit about KPIs. What are some of the effective, Joe, maybe you can continue on this a bit more too, but what are some of the effective individual level KPIs that you've seen people include in action plans?
So thank you very much. So one of the main things that we need to start with, and again, like when we're doing those KPI settings, it's always a coaching setting rather than telling people what they need to do. It's about supporting people come up with what they believe they need to develop on. And what we usually do is when we're setting KPIs, we definitely want it to be realistic. We want it to be something that we're able to measure. And that's, again, what tools support us to do. But in addition to that, when we're setting KPIs, it needs to be organizationally and personally integrated. So we don't separate it. We actually integrate both. And that's basically how we create an effective KPI for the individual through coaching them on a CQ level along with their leaders. So we don't separate the KPI creation setting. It's always integrated in order for everyone to hold themselves, first of all, accountable, and for them to know that they are going to also be held accountable moving forward when the measure is their change in how they react and act with people, the measurable change in building better relationships across the organization, a measurable change in changing the culture of how teams, individuals, and people and leaders deal with everyone holistically. So basically those, like for me, basically when we're working on those, make sure that when we're creating KPIs, we integrate personal and professional KPIs rather than separate them and make them realistic and some things that we can basically measure with a specific timeline.
I think that kind of ties back to the head and the heart too, right? And we show up as one complete integrated being at work. And in our process of doing that, this is my KPI because it's who I am and it's going to impact my work, which is one in the same, right?
Absolutely.
Is anyone else have anything to add in terms of KPIs or want to jump into the KPI, the individual level conversation? All right, well, let's just keep rolling into the next bit here. All right, so the last thing I want to get to before we go into the Q&A section, and we're leaving hopefully 5 minutes of time to do that today, which May can help us with. But if I could have all the panelists just talk about maybe one thing, just one thing. I mean, if we've had people stay with us this whole time, you know, and listen to this dialogue that we're having around developing the culturally intelligent employee, but what is, if they remember nothing else from this 60-minute morning, what's one thing they should take away that is critical for making sure that you're putting together a development strategy and a plan that's going beyond, not I check the box, right? The inevitable, I check the box here, to actually create sustained change. Lynette, do you want to start this for us?
Sure. I think the one thing I'd offer is think of CQ, or cultural intelligence, as a muscle that you're trying to develop. build and sustain that over time. So when you're trying to get in shape and tone your body, you don't go to the gym and meet with a personal trainer once and get the results, right? The same is true when developing cultural competence. You need to exercise that new muscle of cultural competence and put it to practice often until it becomes a new habit. So my advice would be to create learning opportunities for yourself or employees and leaders, if you're a practitioner, to continue to practice so that you can develop, grow, and sustain this new capability.
Great. Well, great. That's fantastic. Joe, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to address one. I'm going to say my one thing based on one of the comments that one of the members attending have raised, which is, what do I do in order to get the leaders convinced that this is important? I believe one of the things we were talking about today, and we touched base on more than once, is to create safety. And when you are not in a leadership position, that does not mean you're not a leader. You can still lead change through creating safety for your leader to agree that change is required. Remember that your leader as well, or your manager or your boss, they also are humans. They also have the right to be fearful of change. But as an individual, when you see that this is something that could create benefit for the bigger part of the organization, before you go and you try to inform them that we need change to take place, you need to make it safe for them to listen to you. You need to make it, again, data-driven for them to be able to be convinced that this is something that needs, because they will have to convince someone that they're reporting to as well. So sort of provide them with the support they need to make this happen. And I would say also start with yourself. So how would you inflict change in yourself from a cultural perspective that would then trigger them to ask you, hey, what have you done to yourself? Because I want that. So I would just say, what is it that you could do to create a safer environment? Definitely cultural intelligence will definitely support you to do that.
Thank you. Robin.
About that, I had to mute. I also wanted to just real quickly respond to that question, because I know that that's always a question. How do I get my C-suite connected? How do I get them to sign on? And my experience has been much like Joe's. To get your CEO on board, it's the 3 C's, right? So it's clients, it's connected to, which is always connected to the bottom line. So how can you motivate them by showing how this benefits how we interact with customers or clients. Second is community. CEOs are really concerned and extra vigilant when it comes to their reputation in the community. So how do you connect it to building that brand reputation in the community? And then third is their colleagues. CEOs are competitive. So what are the other competitors in the industry doing? And is there a way that this particular company can surpass them on the leaderboard, or be that one company in the industry that is moving forward in cultural intelligence? So just wanted to speak to that. But the one thing I'm really big on connecting all of this to an L&D format. So whether your organization has a full-blown L&D team, or if you just have an HR person who wears many hats, connecting CQ to your L&D format is going to be crucial, so that it's not just to check the box. And it can be as simple as utilizing what some of my clients, what we like to call the drip method. And if you're in L&D, you know what I'm talking about, which is very effective, right? They establish a regular cadence of sending out just tiny little micro learnings. It could be articles, blogs, podcasts, reflection questions that tie back to CQ, but keeping this front of mind, utilizing a regular cadence so that it becomes part of the common language is an effective means of ensuring it's not just a check the box.
Good. And Thais, please.
Yeah. So, I kind of talked about just understanding the why at the organizational team, individual level. I also would say just intentionally weaving diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything that you do. But I would say my one thing is really creating memorable experience. And it's that I always think about that famous sentiment that people might forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And I think that's really, kind of at the heart of like what motivates people to change. So.
Very good. Nice. Perfect. Well, we have, let's see, about 5 minutes left. We're running pretty good on time. May, do you want to let us know of some of the questions that might have come through over this last bit of time to have us respond?
Yes. Great. Thank you. One question was, if we've attended a CQ workshop, feel like the workplace, but you're not in a leadership position. I think I did speak to that pretty well already. If you need more follow-up, please reach out to us about that. Somebody did ask a question about the panelist contact info. I will not require that of you. If you feel comfortable at all, please put that in the chat if you'd like to have people reach out to you, panelists. Somebody did ask about a link to the cultural values tool. What I would personally say about that is it is a tool that we have used in our workshops, but is not a separate tool that we have made available for purchase in any way. But please also reach out to that on how you could integrate certain tools that we use into maybe other workshops, or how you could have a workshop with us. And then if the panelists are willing to, what is the latest book that addresses the culturally intelligent employee? Do you have any book recommendations?
There was a question, I'm sorry, that I answered privately though, but as long as we have time, I think maybe if you're fine, I could maybe quickly answer that. A question that was about the difference between EQ and CQ, and where does CQ pick up where EQ leaves off. That was from Andrew. So I honestly believe that all intelligences work together. They're, again, like the head and the heart. You can't say that they are in constant, but that's how we pictured, they're in constant war. But both intelligences, cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence, both support each other. Because again, both are more about self-realization and self-learning. So the more you know yourself, the more you're able to be more effective. So there, again, based on your needs, where do you feel you are less competent? That would be where you could start. But as I said, both basically push you forward as intelligences.
There was one question that came through prior to the event, which might be helpful to talk about, is with DEI initiatives, have you been successful seeing a bottom-up approach to making change, or a top-down approach, or both, or what? So if anyone wants to talk about that a bit, that would be great too.
Amy, oh, sorry. Sorry, Amy, if I could just go back to the book question, because I know we didn't really answer that. I'm totally biased, I admit it right up front, but I think any of the books that are written by David Livermore around cultural intelligence are really helpful. So whether you attend a CQ workshop or not, these books are really helpful in defining the framework and the application of. So I think driven by difference, leading with cultural intelligence, expand your borders. And if you travel and want to be more culturally intelligent as an individual, The Curious Traveler is also an awesome book that is practical in application.
Good, nice. Does anyone want to add to the comments around bottom up or top down, or have any perspective they'd like to add on that?
I think that bottom up is always the best approach for obvious reasons, right? CQ needs to be embedded in the culture for it to live and thrive. And culture is set with the tone at the top, because it's not what you say, but how you behave. And so I love it when organizations are bought in from the C-suite down. I think it's critical in order for everyone to take it serious, because if my CEO is sending out the email about cultural intelligence and the importance of it, I am loath to miss that training and to make it important. However, sometimes it is a bottom up or a middle out approach, just because of the nature of the organization. And that doesn't mean that that approach won't work. It just means that the organization has a more challenging opportunity, has an opportunity to ensure that they use those 3 C's to get the attention of the C-suite. And that was your clients or customers, your community, and your colleagues.
Perfect. Well, we are at time today. On behalf of the Cultural Intelligence Center and the panelists, I want to thank everyone that has joined us for this last 60 minutes. We certainly hope you found the dialogue and the discussion helpful and impactful as we all continue on journeys to develop culturally intelligent employees. And if anything we've talked about today has made you curious about the Cultural Intelligence Center and the work that we're doing, please do feel free to reach out to us. We would love to connect with you further. And with that, we will close for the day. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.